But there are so many dehydrators on the market, you don't know which one to choose, and it's driving you crazy. Do you go with this one, or do you go for this one? Or do you go to the one that you found at the thrift store that you don't even know works well? Let me help you choose the best dehydrator for you. So what makes me an expert to tell you what kind of machine to get? I'm Darcy. I'm with the Purposeful Pantry, and I've been dehydrating for about 20 years, and that's what we talk about here on this channel. So I've tested all sorts of machines. I buy them, I test them, I use them, and so I know what they do and how they work. Okay, first let's talk about budget. That's the biggest thing that you need to think about when you're buying a dehydrator. What is your budget? Now, you may need to adjust that a little bit after you've kind of looked around and see that you have features that you really want, so you might need to save for a little while longer for the machine that you think you end up getting. But you can also look at Facebook Marketplace, you can look at any kind of Craigslist or the thrift stores. You can ask around to friends who might have purchased one and then said, I don't like to do this, so they're willing to give it to you for free. There are all sorts of ways to get things less expensive. You're gonna look at, most machines run for anywhere from $50 to about $350. Now that is low end, low power, stackable machines, all the way up to some that are really big and lots of trays and are cabinet style and have a lot of bells and whistles. Any place in this spectrum may be where your machine falls. Now the second thing to look for is space. You need to know the space that you have to put in. Look around your house and see a space that you can set your machine or that you can store it, because if you don't want to keep it out all the time, you need to have a place where you can store it. They're not small. So find that place that you think it's going to be. You need to have about 6 inches of clearance around the machine from the front, the top, the sides, to make sure that it has enough air draw coming in and a way to push the hot air out and that moisture out. So make sure that you have a good space for it. I happen to keep my main dehydrator, my laundry closet, on top of my dryer. That's where I use it most of the time. I now have one set up in the garage in a little preservation station that I created, that I can keep the larger one out there and run things on it outside. So the next thing to look for is a temperature control. The reason is, back in the 70s and 80s, when dehydrators first came on the market for home use, it was a big draw to make beef jerky. Now they did talk about how you can do other stuff too, but the beef jerky was a thing that it's expensive, you can make it yourself. So their machines back then only had one temperature that was made for doing beef jerky. That tends to not be okay for doing chicken jerky, and it's too hot for doing many other things like herbs, like vegetables or fruits that are high in sugar, because it could caramelize them, which is another way of almost burning, but not really, but close, okay? So it's not necessarily a great thing for everything that you do. Now that's not knocking any of you who have a one temperature machine. If you're doing great with it, then awesome. But if you have a choice in the beginning, to make sure that your machine has a temperature control. Preferably from 95 to at least 165, but some kind of go like 5 degrees either way. You're good anywhere in there. Now the next thing to look for is wattage. Wattage is important because the wattage is how much electricity it takes to make that machine work. Lower wattage machines start around 250 watts, which are really inefficient and they take longer to dry things. And then you can get up to 1,000 watts and more. Some larger machines are 1,000 watts because they need that to take care of the larger capacity that they can carry. So you need to go at least 500 watts and more to get the best machine that you can get. Yes, there are plenty of machines that work in the lower wattage range and they work just fine. But know that they're going to take longer to do than any of the recommended times that you might see online, because it just takes it longer to dry. I would try to stay away from those really low end ones if you can. Okay. Inversely though, you don't need to go buy a 1,000 watt machine. Most machines that are great are around 600 watts and they work just fine. Now I can tell you this, between a 600 watt 6 tray Cosori and a 1,000 watt 10 tray Cosori, they dry about the same rate. And the reason is this 1,000 watt machine, it's a little larger and it has to dry more stuff. And it has a larger capacity to work with. The 600 watt machine has its own, but they dry at about the same rate. And I'll put that video right up here where I tested that to make sure. So don't necessarily believe that a 1,000 watt machine is necessarily better than a 600 watt machine if you're talking about comparing actual sizes. Bigger isn't always better. Okay, now let's get to the style. You have two styles. You have a stackable machine like this Nesco, and you have a cabinet style machine like this Cosori or an Excalibur, like most of you might be familiar with. The difference is the stackables require that you stack trays on top of each other, and they have a fan and heater that either goes from the top down or from the bottom up, depending on how it's built. With a cabinet style machine, the fan is in the back of the machine and blows across all trays equally at the same time. Now here's some pros and cons about both machines. Pros for the stackables are they're less expensive, they're lightweight, and they can be expanded. Now, some machines like this Nesco cannot be expanded much, but there are some that can be expanded up to 20, 25, 30 trays. I can't remember exactly which, but you need to read the manual, and you can usually find those online before you purchase to see what the maximum number of trays that it can use. So you would buy the base machine, and then over time you might add trays to it and make it a larger machine. And that makes it, over time, could be a better machine for you. Now, some cons for the stackables are they are more brittle. Over time, I have broken more trays on my Nesco than I've ever done anything to any of the cabinet style machines that I have. It's plastic, which over time can degrade. So I've seen people with some of the less expensive ones have trays that just melt down or over time get really brittle and then break easily. Now, the last con of a stackable is that it tends to be less efficient than a cabinet style. And that doesn't mean a lot because I'm not talking about 8, 10, 12 hours less efficient, but it's less efficient. When the air goes in one direction, it dries from the top down. So those things up on top will dry faster than the things on the bottom, and you have to make sure you rotate those trays. Now, I've pitted a Nesco against a Cosori and against an Excalibur, and I'll leave that up here in the description box below so you can see how the three of them work. And generally, the Nesco wasn't too far behind because the Nesco is a good, powerful, stackable machine. But if you were to take a Hamilton Beach against an Excalibur, I'd take the Excalibur any day because it's going to dry more efficiently. So some pros for the cabinet style is they generally are metal. The Excalibur is not, but the kind of plastic that they use is an extruded plastic, which is much stronger than the plastics that you find in many of the stackables. But most of them are metal of some sort, and they have metal trays, so they don't tend to break. Now, the last thing is more of an aesthetic thing, but if it matters to you, the cabinet style machines tend to look a little more aesthetically pleasing on your kitchen counter than the white plastic of stackables. Now, there are some stackables that look pretty cool, but don't go by the cool look about these machines because the way they work is way more important than the way they look. The last pro about the cabinet style, in general, they tend to have more trays than many stackables do. So you can buy a bigger machine up front and not have to invest over time, but it does come at a higher cost. The cons, that they are more expensive. They're also heavier. They're not as easy to move around from room to room or place to place or to put into storage if you don't want to have it out all the time. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is not necessarily about the machine itself, but about what is included, the accessories. Most of them come with the machine and all the trays that you need. They might come with something like this, which is a mesh that goes on top of your trays because many of them are made out of metal and things will stick to them pretty easily. And even the plastic grates of some of the stackables can get really sticky. So you want to put something on top of them to lay on there so that you put your food here. And when it shrinks, it doesn't fall through and get to the bottom of your machine. But many of them only include 1 or 2 pieces of this. And if you have a 7 to 10 tray machine, you're going to need more. You can get something that's like this, or you can get something that's like this, which is sort of like the material that you would put in a cabinet to line your cabinet to make things not slide, but it's different. This is food grade, and it is a silicone mesh that rolls really easily and it helps you pick things up. The other thing that it might come with, many of them have a fruit leather tray that's like this. It's a hard plastic tray that I think are pretty much garbage in most machines, okay? The problem is that these things can warp really easily after they get heated, and then they are no longer really good to do fruit leather in because it won't sit straight in your tray. So what I use this for is I put it on the bottom of the machine to catch anything that falls, that I can pull it out really easily. That's what I use it for. Now instead, what you can do is that you can buy some fruit leather sheets like this, which are flexible sheets that can lay there that you can put fruit leather on. But this is also good for putting things on that are really small, or maybe you have a lot of sticky things that you want to protect everything with. But there are also silicone ones that are like this that you can make fruit leather with that come with a lip already. These are not my favorites, but they are really useful for some people, and some people love these things to death. So those are some options. Now, another option that you can do is just get parchment paper. I don't like using parchment paper because it's wasteful. You can only use it for a few times and you have to toss it. And then other people like to use 100% cotton fabric, okay, that you just cut the fabric out to the size of your tray, you put things on it, you let it dry, you take the fabric off and you toss it in your washing machine and wash it, and it can be used another day. But know that you're probably going to have to buy some extra sheets for it. I'll leave a link down below where I kind of collect them all together in one place so you can look around. Now, which machine should you buy? I can't tell you. The problem is I don't know where you live. If you don't live in the United States, many of the recommendations I have may not even be available to you. But I do have a resource that's down below that I break down the best machines in budget categories, okay? And then I give some alternatives for those of you who live outside the United States. What machine do I use all the time? Most of the time is a Cosori. I have a 6-tray Cosori, I have a 10-tray Cosori, and I use them both as much as I can. I do have an Excalibur, but it doesn't get pulled out as often any longer because I like having a door that opens instead of a door that I have to take off and then replace, because too often I start to put it on like the Excalibur needs and I don't get it hooked right and it falls off, or I have trouble manipulating trays with one hand and the door with another. But an Excalibur is great too. It just tends to be a little more expensive. There are lots of machines on the market that are really great, and my personal preference doesn't mean that what you choose is not going to be good too. But if you need some recommendations, I've got that down in the description box below. So what I'd love to hear from you now is if you already have a dehydrator, put it down in the discussion box below and tell the pros and the cons so that people coming behind us can read what your opinion is of the machines that you use, because all that information is going to be really helpful for somebody to pick the machine that they like. And if you want to see the comparison between a Nesco, a Cosori, and an Excalibur, watch this video right here. And until I see you again next time, keep preserving.